All right. So, bring him to a close. 50 minutes are mine. Shh, shh, shh. Put your phones away for a second. Focus, it's science time. So, quick thing about the notes page. I realized this morning when I was printing them that they're black backgrounds. So, writing on them is a little bit difficult. So, just try to write in the white margins the best you can. Use that space.
Should I just take pictures of the notes?
If you want to take pictures of the notes, that's fine. No, you should still be writing stuff down. I am recording this like we're going to start doing, so this will be online for you later as well as a resource. So last week, we talked all about Earth history, continental drift, sediments and rocks, deposition of soils, fossils. Now we're going to focus on the life, the formation of life side of things. Who likes biology more than earth science? This is going to be fun for you guys then. So what do you guys know about the formation of life? It started many, many millions of years ago.
It started with one single cell.
So it started with one single cell. Evolution. Species after species. We evolved. What else? What else do we know about life? It evolves into many things. Is life simple?
No.
Life is super complex. And the processes that make life are super complex. How many other planets do we know of that have life? None that we know of. No other planet that we know of has life. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. That is a long time. The universe is over 13 billion years old. That's even longer. It didn't take very long for life to actually evolve on Earth. It took a very short amount of time, but it took the right conditions. Does anyone know what the little area we live in the solar system is called that supports life? So we live, the biosphere, but like if we look at our solar system, where does our planet lie that allows it to have life? Does anyone know what it's called? The Goldilocks zone, where you're the right distance from the sun, but you're not too far away where you don't get super cold, but you don't get baked like Mercury, where it's so hot that life can't survive. We live in the perfect location. In all reality, it might be cold outside right now, but it's really not that cold. It can get much, much, much colder. So we're going to start in this pre-Archean time frame. 4.5 billion years ago. The sun is just forming from the supernova of a previous star. We're forming from a gas cloud. We have rocks colliding, building up over time, meshing together like magnets sticking together. And we kept getting bigger. The moon forms in this time period. The oceans begin to form in a period called the late bombardment, where we were constantly being hit by meteorites, asteroids, whole bunch of different objects found in space. Brought us water, oceans form. This is kind of a simulated version. Let's see. I should have brought a clipboard. It's going to work, but the sound won't work. So, very early in Earth life, oceans are forming. It rained for a really long time. Mountains. And it's at this point where we start to get life. Right after the oceans form, we actually see life evolve very quickly, very early in Earth's history. It shows that life actually formed around 3.8 billion years ago. You don't have to write this one down. When life starts to form, we enter the Archean period. Nothing but single-celled organisms, 3.8 to 2.5 billion years ago. We have signs of life 3.7 to 3.8 billion years ago. There is evidence, however, that life actually evolved much sooner than that. That it actually evolved when the Earth was a much harsher place to live, where we had asteroids and meteorites bombarding us continuously. Life formed in these early oceans. Yeah.
I have a real question.
Yeah.
How do we know?
Right on the sides. Huh? How do we know?
How do we know there's 3.7 billion years ago?
The way we know, and Lewis, this is an excellent question. The way we know that life formed 3.7 billion years ago, if I can hit this pointer, if we look up here, these are called stromatolites. Stromatolites are not a typical rock that we find just lying anywhere. Stromatolites are remnants of ancient cyanobacteria that as they grew, as they lived, died, reproduced, made layers and built up from the sediment and made these like little mounds along the ocean coasts. We can look at the rock, these stromatolites that were left behind, and we can date them just like we were doing last week with rock. And the oldest rock forms that we find are about 3.7 to 3.8 billion years old. These guys have been around for a long time. They have existed for a long time. We find these guys in Australia and Northern Ireland. Some of the only places where this rock still exists. But this is the earliest sign of life that we have. But we believe that life may have started a little bit earlier. We just don't have fossil evidence yet. What early life looked like: single-cell organisms relying on photosynthesis from the sun to produce energy. This is all we had for a very, very, very long time. This is what life was. It wasn't super complex. There weren't a whole bunch of different species going on. This is what we had. Very simple. Prokaryotic. What does prokaryotic mean, or prokaryote? Does anyone know? Prokaryote means that it had no organelles. Just like all of you guys have organs to make you survive, these cells didn't have those organs, didn't have those organelles. They had DNA to help it replicate, and that was pretty much it. Super simple. This went on for 1 billion years where we didn't have anything but single-celled organisms. We enter the Proterozoic era, 2.5 to 544 million years ago. We've already went through most of Earth's time with almost no life to simple life altogether. Proterozoic. This is when we get our first eukaryotes. Life starts to thrive. It starts to diversify. We get a bunch more species. Stuff starts to get exciting now. It's kind of like Pac-Man. So a prokaryote was a cell without organelles. It was at this time, 2.7 billion years ago, that we actually started to get our first eukaryotic cells. Cells that had distinct organelles that allowed them to survive. Your cells in your body are all made of eukaryotic cells. This right here, this jump is what changed life. Without this jump, we wouldn't exist. There'd only be single-celled organisms. Life would still be boring. This jump changed it. What scientists believe is that prokaryotic cells were actually engulfed by larger prokaryotic cells. So if we view Pac-Man up here, we have a big prokaryotic cell, a small prokaryotic cell being consumed by the larger yellow larger cell. When that happened, that bigger cell did not consume that smaller cell. It integrated it. It added it to its system. It used it. It created a symbiosis, which means that both organisms lived together and benefited from each other. This is how we got our first eukaryotic organism. This right here is a modern-day amoeba, which is very similar to the life that we assume was the first karyotic cells. The way we know about when these guys existed is these eukaryotic cells produce what we call a sterol. It's a chemical that can be left behind in fossilized shale. The oldest rocks that we can see this appear in is 2.7 billion years old. Yeah. But organelles first appear. This is when we diversify. Now we're starting to get really interesting. Just over 500 million years ago, not a very long time, really isn't. It's like a blip in overall time. 600 million years ago, these eukaryotic cells that previously were just kind of floating around on their own, had their organelles, started to group together and specialize. They made tissues. This is a fossil of a very early multicellular organism. Super small, not any bigger than a penny. Bunch of eukaryotic cells joined together, living in one form, one body. We're actually not for sure why cells did this. We have some theories, but we're not for sure why. Because up until that point, it had been super beneficial for them to live by themselves as single-celled organisms. But somehow something changed where it benefited these cells to live together. They assume it was a mutation that occurred in the DNA that made it impossible for them to live and survive by themselves. And they started to group up and form more complicated life.
Mr. Wells, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
so I got some fossils I'll hand around. I actually have a stromatolite here. Oops, I'll stand in the light. This is a fragment of a stromatolite. There's a lot of this in the ditch currently, because they break this rock up and it's used for roads and stuff. But they don't understand that this is something cool, so they smash it up and use it for road construction and stuff. But I got a stromatolite. They're lumpy, like it's lumpy. I don't know what to tell you. It's lumpy, so you can tell it's an actual fossil. This is a fossil of microorganisms, all right? So as Mr. Wells is going, I got some fossils I'll pass around. I'm passing around a couple that would be remnants of that sort of time, where it's the first few organisms kind of start to peek out. Oh, I think we got a little bit to catch up to do with that. But I'll hand out some fossils.
Paleozoic.
So the Paleozoic. This is where life really started to diversify. We see most of the forms of life we start to know today, that live today, appear in the Paleozoic. We start to see limbs form. We see eyes form in this period of time. This is where our organs, our bodies got unique. So we have this explosion. We're not talking about an explosion of a sun. We're not talking about the explosion of a volcano. This boom is called the Precambrian explosion, where we went from virtually no life to life all over. Life expanded. Life took over. Earth went from virtually no life to tons and tons of diverse life forms in a couple million years. It is the greatest moment in Earth history when it comes to formation of life. Nothing has ever come close to the amount of diversification of life we had in the Precambrian explosion. This is where we start to see trilobites. We start to see squid, fish evolve. Early amphibians start to show up. In the later part of it, we even start to see some reptiles. All forms of life that still exist today. We get complex very quickly. We diversify very quickly. At this point, 544 million years ago, we have invertebrates. What does an invertebrate mean? It has no spine. They don't have bones. They do have some hard structures, though. Clams, squids, mollusks, snails. This is when we get them. Early squids had shells. Trilobites no longer exist, but they dominated for a very long time. These are the belief from fossil evidence is that the first form of invertebrate was a comb jelly, just like this. They live in deep, deep water and give off these fluorescent lights. What do you think those lights do when you live in dark water? They attract food. They don't attract light, they attract food. These creatures create this life. We don't yet live on land. There is no organism at this point that lives on land. Every form of life currently lives in the ocean 544 million years ago. Why do you think we can't live on land yet? There is land. Land exists at this point. There was oxygen. Yeah. We didn't have legs yet. What do we have right now that has a hole in it above Antarctica? The ozone. The ozone which protects us from what? UV radiation. UV radiation destroys DNA. It breaks up life. Ozone had not formed yet to protect life from it. The ocean is the only spot where life was protected from ultraviolet radiation. Ocean protected us. It kept us safe. It kept our DNA safe. Hello, vertebrates. We now start to see vertebrates. Our first chordates. They had a chordata, a simple spine appears. Whoa. Yep. We get our first fish. We get our first sharks. Fish and sharks are our first chordates. Mr. Anderson?
So just so you know, I'm passing around all the fossils at once. These big ones, these heavy rocks, they're really dense. These are full of shells and other things. It's not like one thing in here.
No.
It's a bunch of broken bits of one thing. And there's magnifying glasses with them. So just take a quick peek and find some cool things and just pass it on. And there's also some shark teeth going around. And there's a little slab with a fish, like bone skeletal structure in it too. Okay.
So 530 million years ago, we get our first fish, our first vertebrates, our first spines, organisms. This is what we believe is close to the first fish that we found. What is this fish missing? It has not evolved fins yet. It has a tail that helps it swim, but it doesn't have fins. What about the eyes? What do you notice about the eyes? They're pretty simple, right? These eyes, they're probably not used much more than for being able to spot shadows above them. They probably can't see images. They just see light and dark, and they can tell where other organisms are to protect themselves. But this is our early fish. Sharks appear. Sharks are super complicated. They're super successful. Do we still have sharks today?
Yes.
Sharks have existed for 500 million years. Sharks have existed longer than trees. Older than plants, older than most plants. Fish are the masters of the earth. 300 million years, nothing was more complex. Nothing ruled the oceans more than fish. Fish were dominant. 370 million years ago, we have a change. We get these lobe-finned fishes that start to climb on land. This is a lungfish. Currently exists today. Very similar to an early amphibian. These amphibians, these late fish, these lobe-finned fish, were able to gulp air and move air through their skin. Their fins had some muscular structures and some bones that allowed them to support their body and actually crawl up onto land. Do these amphibians look like anything we have today? So we have the lungfish, which is a fish, not an amphibian. But what are amphibians? Frogs, toads, salamanders? Does this kind of look like a salamander or a newt? Kind of. So it's at this point. It's at this point in history. Shh, guys. It's in this point in history of the Earth that the ozone has now formed. Life-protecting ozone has now developed, allowing us to leave the oceans and move on to land. Huge milestone. We quickly took advantage of it. it was very beneficial to escape the ocean where you had a bunch of predators, sharks, squids, whole bunch of other predators that would consume you. So it was a benefit to leave. The complicated part here that amphibians hadn't figured out yet is their skin has to stay moist or they will dry out. So they have to return to the ocean or they will die. Their eggs also need to be laid in the ocean so that they could stay moist. They can't dry out. These amphibians led to reptiles. Reptiles evolved from amphibians 320 million years ago. It only took about 10 million years for amphibians to evolve into reptiles. The real game changer here was the evolution of the amniotic egg. The amniotic egg allowed life to not have to return to the ocean. These eggs could be laid on land, hatch on land. Life was no longer dependent upon the oceans. They were able to take advantage of a completely empty ecosystem. We had some plants there at this point, but no animals yet. Just reptiles. They took complete advantage. Reptiles, there were no other animals there to compete with reptiles, so reptiles diversified. They took advantage of the whole thing. So, this leads to the greatest mass extinction the Earth has ever seen, and hopefully will ever see. Hopefully there will never be a larger mass extinction than the Great Dying. Also called the Cambrian extinction. 96% of all life dead in a couple million years. 96 of all the life that had existed, gone, wiped off the planet. Scientists are not really sure why. All of a sudden we had life, then all of a sudden it was gone. Like that. Erased from the fossil record. Was not there anymore. There is evidence that there was a massive volcanic eruption in northern Siberia, northern Russia, decimated everything. These types of eruptions still can take place. Haven't in a while. We got one in North America right now. Yellowstone sits on top of one of these mega volcanoes. Great Dying. It's not a great moment in history for us. You know what the Great Dying led to? It led to one of the greatest creatures ever walked the planet. Oh, man. We actually know very little. They are pretty great.
Which, I mean, that's fair. Because, you know,
Pay attention, please.
the greatest extinction event of all time wasn't about the dinosaurs at all. About 250 million years ago, something caused even more species to die out. An event called the End Permian Extinction, also known by its much cheerier name, the Great Dying. The Great Dying took out 96% of marine species and 70% of all land animals. Yeah. Scientists have been searching for the exact cause of this mysterious mass extinction for decades, but most scenarios that they've come up with have been less than satisfying, I'd say. However, a researcher at UC Berkeley is on the case, and he might be onto something. The most convincing theory so far involves the large-scale volcanism of the Siberian traps that happened around the same time as the end Permian extinction. For those, by the way, playing the home game, that's at the end of the Permian era. The eruptions exploded 300,000 years before the end Permian extinction, but were active for hundreds of thousands of years even after. They oozed lava and they just spewed ash all over the place. This would have caused a whole host of issues like global warming and localized acid rain. But how did volcanoes in Siberia manage to wipe out life across the whole planet? To add to the mystery, the end Permian fossil record shows that a global decline of forests at this time was coupled with mutated pollen. Something was making it impossible for plants to reproduce. It's been proposed that the volcanic gases from the Siberian traps could have severely compromised Earth's ozone layer, exposing life on Earth to extremely high levels of UVB radiation. Scientists think that this could have damaged the plants, potentially destroying the food chain from the bottom up. This is where UC Berkeley researcher Jerry Benda comes in. To test this theory, he took many pine trees and he put them inside an extinction chamber, where they were exposed to extreme amounts of UVB radiation, akin to what would have been experienced before the Great Dying. Lo and behold, the trees made malformed pollen and became sterile. What's even crazier, though, is 4 of the 5 greatest.
What does sterile mean? Unable to reproduce. Sterile is bad.
Including the dinosaurs, were accompanied by large-scale volcanic events, which are often associated with warming global temperatures, acid rain, and you guessed it, ozone layer depletion. It's a little too early to say if this new finding helps explain other extinctions, but it is kind of crazy that Earth's worst extinctions weren't caused by giant asteroids or hellfires, but good old-fashioned climate change and ozone depletion. And if we keep at it, maybe we'll just bump the Great Dying out of first place. Do you think we can get a trophy for that? No. Thank you.
Let's not do that. So the Great Dying led to the largest land animals that ever existed. Ever. Dinosaurs. Life on land was wiped clean. A few reptiles survived. A very few reptiles survived. Those reptiles evolved into dinosaurs very quickly. There was very low competition. They were not fighting with other animals for resources because there was nothing else there. Something that was super complex. Animals got had a lot of freedom and could grow really quickly. They ruled for 165 million years. Do you know how long humans have been around for? 2. Human species has been around for 2 million years. Dinosaurs ruled for 165 million years. They were extraordinary. The one thing that they were different from reptiles, dinosaurs are not lizards. Do not confuse them for lizards. Dinosaurs were endotherms, meaning that they could produce their own heat. This is special for them. This helped them survive. After dinosaurs, this is where we start to see our first ancestors. Small, mouse-like organisms that lived on insects. They were no bigger than mice. They lived in holes. They were primarily nocturnal. They stayed like this for a very, very, very long time. They sat in the shadows of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs ate these guys. It was not a good time for mammals, but we still existed. We survived. Survived. Survival is the key. Boom! Hit by an asteroid. In the Gulf of Mexico. Bye-bye, dinosaurs. Bye-bye, dinosaurs. We enter the modern Cenozoic. Shh, hold it back together, guys. The modern Cenozoic era. 65 million years ago to present. To now. This is where we sit. This is when mammals took advantage. We took over very quickly. The rulers of the land were gone, leaving an opening for our little mouse-like ancestors to take over. And boy, did we take over. We get what we call the megafauna very quickly. The largest land mammals to ever live. This guy right here. This is called the Paraceratherium. The Paraceratherium was an ancestor of modern-day rhinos. No horn. This guy, taller than a giraffe. Much heavier than an African bush elephant, which is the largest mammal that lives today. This is elephants right now. This is the biggest organism, biggest mammal to ever walk the earth. Stuff was huge because there was an opportunity. There was availability. There was nothing else to compete with these organisms. Until man came. And the Ice Age didn't help either. Mr. Anderson, would you unplug the USB thing from the computer for a second so I can hear, so we have some sound?
Hi, I'm Emma Robinson, and this What Is video. We're going to take a closer look at the ice ages. In 1840, Swiss scientist Louis Agassiz noticed glaciers. Huge rivers of ice created by snowfall occur throughout northern Europe. As glaciers move, they transport rocks and scour the ground beneath them, leaving evidence of their passing. Agassiz theorized glaciers were the remnants of a huge glacial ice field that once covered much of the continent. Geologic evidence of massive glacial activity also occurs in North America. Agassiz had discovered evidence of the most recent major ice age, a period of time when a glacial ice field extended across large sections of the planet. Geologists have evidence of 5 major ice ages, more commonly called glacial ages. The earliest well-established glacial age, called the Huronian, formed between 2.4 to 2.1 billion years ago, during the early Proterozoic eon. The last glacial age, and the only one to occur since human history, began 1.5 million years ago and receded 15,000 years ago. During that time, the watertight ice field covered all of Canada and extended as far south as Indiana. Glacial ages have enormous effects on a planet's weather patterns, animals, and plant life. Animals that cannot adapt to the colder environments die out. Similarly, animals that adapt to cold environments may not survive the change when glaciers recede. The Milankovitch theory by astronomer Milutin Milankovitch suggests variation in the Earth's orbit account for glacial ages. Instead of orbiting the sun in a constant pattern, the Earth wobbles. Over millions of years, this wobbling affects global temperatures. As glacial ice fields spread, snow and ice reflect sunlight that would otherwise warm the Earth, causing further drops in cold temperatures. Low levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can also contribute to a glacial age. As you can see, Earth's climate goes through drastic changes when looking at it over thousands and millions of years. Wow.
Ice ages, very important to mammalian life. Made us change. It was very cold, obviously. It also absorbed a lot of ocean water into ice, opening up opportunity for animals to travel across land bridges from Russia to North America. Or otherwise, us, modern man. Our early ancestors, 55 million years ago, right after 10 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs. Early primates looked like this. Kind of like a lemur, kind of like a squirrel. This is what our ancestor looked like. Over time, over millions of years, we diversified. We evolved, our ancestors evolved in Africa. We evolved in Africa. We left Africa, we migrated away. Some of us migrated away. We went to Europe. We get Neanderthal. Neanderthal is our close cousin. Neanderthal, Homo sapiens separate. We also get Homo erectus that appears at this time. All bipedal. We all could walk on 2 legs. We lose our fur. Our fur disappears. It's no longer beneficial to us. We evolved the ability to use tools. This separates us. Using tools allows our brain to grow, develop, helps us learn. Learning gave us fitness. It allowed us to be better than other organisms. We could run farther. We could outsmart bigger organisms, faster organisms. We were social. We lived in groups. We told stories. We passed on those stories to our descendants. And here, we don't need sound for this, Mr. Anderson.